Hi, I'm Ken Harmon, the editor and founder of West Trade Review. Welcome to our newest episode of the Postscript interview series. Today we have with us Mickie Kennedy. Uh, Mickie is a gay writer who resides in Baltimore County, Maryland, with his family and a shy cat that lives under his son's bed. He's a Pushcart Prize nominee. His work appeared or is forthcoming in Three Penny Review, Colorado Review, Gulf Coast, Nimrod, Copper Nickel, and elsewhere. He was a finalist for the 2023 Pablo Neruda Prize, and he earned an MFA from George Mason University. Welcome, Mickie. We're happy to have you with us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
So I want to start with some basic sort of questions. I noticed sort of big philosophical things. I noticed on one of your social media platforms that you prominently feature a quote from Robert Frost. To be a poet is a condition, not a profession. Why does this particular quote resonate with you?
I think because I started training in poetry, going to grad school, and then did a professional career that had nothing to do with poetry. And then about 7 or 8 years ago, I picked up poetry again. And it's just sort of been a calling. If I felt like it was feeding my soul, nourishing me in a way that regular work doesn't. And I sort of, liked that it's not necessarily a profession, but more of something that moves you and that you just feel you have to do.
Um, I do have a couple of friends who sort of have the opposite view that writing, like creative writing, is a profession. Um, what do you what do you think the function of poetry, if it's not a profession, what do you think the function of poetry is as an art form in our culture?
For me, I think it's a way of recording emotions, images, experiences. I feel that poetry is very different from other modes of writing in that you can say something in a way that you can call on metaphor and similes and things like that. Um, it is one of those things that I feel that there are people who treat it as a career, and I find also a lot of those people tend to teach. But I do believe that poetry in and of itself is something that has to come from the soul. If it isn't like an experience that reads real, it's not going to work.
I noticed in some of the previous interviews that you've done that you are the owner of a PR firm that specializes in press releases. Um, do you think that the majority of poets focus on the business of writing enough? Those who think it is a business? And in other words, I guess what I'm asking is, what could they do better if they do think it's a business? What could they do better to promote themselves and their work?
Right. So I think that making yourself available is not enough. I think that you have to be proactive in reaching out to people, networking. I'm slowly doing that on Twitter and whatever the next social media platform is going to be, as well as taking account of other podcasts that are out there. I'm have finished up my first manuscript and I'm shopping it with publishers, but I've already sort of shortlisted podcasts that I want to reach out to once the book is published or near published.
How much time of each day would you say you spend on that kind of business of writing stuff, like the networking and being on Twitter and all those different types of things?
I think that combined with editing, I spend about 3 to 4 hours a day. I'm lucky in that my business is at a point that I can sort of step away and take some time and devote to the craft. And I find that editing is not a skill that I was very good at when I began, and it takes a lot of work. And it does feel like real work when you're editing.
What do you think you're doing different now with editing that maybe you didn't do in the beginning?
To be honest, just editing. I used to be a person who just wrote and just said, "This is great. Let's send it out." And I, I I was challenged by a few people that said these poems just aren't finished. And when they showed me and walked me through the process of editing and revising, I came to the same conclusion. These poems weren't finished, and I realized that the actual process of writing, which for me comes pretty natural, has to also be weighed with the ability to edit and turn it into a more finished poem.
What's the most difficult thing about revising, do you think?
I think it's sort of like trying to tighten the language and focus on the core images, and then also pay attention to rhythm. I'm someone who really likes certain sounds. I love internal rhyme. Some people, feel that that's not what I should be focusing on, but it's one of my loves. And I just feel like it's finding it's sculpting it into something better.
Speaking of the rhythm and musicality of language, I saw in another interview that you were from North Carolina, so you are from the South. You are a Southerner. I don't know if you identify that way, but from what I've learned, you were a Southerner at least early in your life. So do you think that has anything to do with maybe your love of language and words, that musicality and rhythm of it? Because in the South, I don't think you can be here
Right.
and then that not affect you in some way.
Yeah, I think that there's sort of a sing-song quality to, listening to older people speak and use the, sounds as well as the shorthand that they use. And you sort of fall in love with that and the images of the South.
Was storytelling something that was, I guess, natural to the people around you?
Yeah, I grew up in rural North Carolina, and everybody had the tall tale, and everybody liked to embellish and weave these little stories that were just fascinating, and I just would listen and take it all in.
Same, same. You couldn't be around my grandfather or any of my relatives on his side of the family without someone telling you some stories.
Right.
Um, so when do you think you first became fascinated with words?
I think at a very early age, as I started to learn how to read, I became fascinated with words. I became fascinated with play of words. I remember coming across the word office, and I knew the word off and I knew the word ice. And I was like, what does this off ice mean? And it was just little things like that I just, was fascinated by. And I think I've always been fascinated by words and learning new words. Another favorite word I learned was motley years ago. And I just love that. I love how it just evokes an image inside my head.
How does a poem usually develop for you? Does it begin with an image or a line, or is it something else?
Usually it begins with a line, and a lot of times these lines don't survive. They're just sort of warm-ups to the poems. And I find that for me, it's just sort of real flowy, and I tend to overwrite, but that's okay, because when you get to the editing, point, you can sort of say, where's the poem in this thing that I've written, and where should I focus? And then sometimes I have to step back and sort of build that moment out more through the editing process.
Nice. So in your poems, I've noticed, at least the poems that I've had the opportunity to read, I've noticed that they often deal with family or identity in some way. What ideas or thematic areas do you tend to explore most in your poems, and what do you think has led you to do so?
Right. So I have a very complex past where in college, I came out as gay, and everybody beat me back into the closet, especially family and friends. And so I did, and it was also the era of AIDS, and I was very afraid of contracting that. And I had a gay uncle, and I saw that he lost a lot of friends and family from it, and I just didn't want that to be what I was going to go through. So I ended up, aligned with a grad school student who, shared with me that we're not going to get married or do anything. Let's just live together and be great friends. But after a while, we talked and decided we wanted to have kids, and so we, with some medical intervention, we did. And after a while, she said, you really don't have to be afraid of AIDS anymore. You could go out and find someone. And I did. So, I found someone about 10 years ago and came out publicly probably about 6 years ago.
So I know we published one poem of yours,
Chronology of the Closet.
Chronology of the Closet. Yeah. That's a really powerful poem. Is that something you've explored a lot? Is your sexual identity in the poems? What's your favorite poem that's about sexual identity that you've written?
Probably one about what my uncle's dead lovers left behind. It sort of shows that I was also open to exploring that, but I got scared and closeted, and then just dealing with the loss that he had. He lost most all of his friends and lovers due to AIDS. He never contracted it. But, he would inherit stuff because most of the people that were gay in Eastern North Carolina had been, excommunicated from their families. And so he would just inherit stuff. And it was almost like hoarding in a way, just rooms full of these memories of other people's lives. And that's sort of what the poem sort of deals with.
Wow. I'd love to read that one sometime. It sounds powerful. So we're publishing one of your poems, well, two of them actually, but there's one in particular I'd like for you to read. It's called A Styrofoam Cup Filled with Peels. And I was wondering before you read if you could just sort of set it up for us a little bit, like what prompted it, what ideas were you sort of exploring in it? And then after you do that, if you don't mind just reading that for us.
Sure. So it deals with my grandmother who was dealing with Alzheimer's and being in a nursing home, and just, how she was changed in a way where she didn't recognize people, or she would often feel like people would get misunderstood, like a son would become a brother and things like that. And so I just sort of wanted to deal with that. And as well as, a love of food and sharing.
Cool. If you don't mind, read that one for us.
Sure. A styrofoam cup filled with peels. Grandma used to be a clothesline strung with razor wire, a hairdryer crackling in a clawfoot tub. She used to be a hole in the arm of a couch from a stubbed out cigarette. Now she's a work boot stuffed with tomato caps, sheep's blood churning in a blender. Now she's a ham hock softening on a windowsill. She thinks her youngest son is her brother, the one who lost his eye in the war. She thinks my mother is just some woman who steals the jello she can't finish. And because I'm always arriving with daisies, she thinks I'm her suitor, not the grandson she was forced to raise when my mother disappeared, which was often. I play along, kissing her forehead, letting her believe whatever she wants. I press sweet things into her hands, the same treats she used to slip me when my mother slipped outside, headed to the liquor store. Muscadines plucked from the vines, smothering her fence, blood orange slices. Grandma twists them in the purpling light. She asks me if she likes them.
It's powerful, so beautiful. The imagery is rich.
Thank you.
Mickie, thank you so much for being with us, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today and reading your poem. And for those of you watching, Mickie will have two poems, and the spring edition, so be on the lookout for those. If you are enjoying our interviews, be sure you follow us on our YouTube page and on social media and sign up for our monthly newsletter. Thanks again, Mickie. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're very welcome.